Dog Man is one of the coolest comic book adaptations in recent years. But like every adaptation, there are differences between the original work and the movie. And man, did you know there are a lot of differences? Shh. Someone needs to call a social worker to Pete's house because this is just not okay. If you've seen the movie, you'll remember how the meanest cat on the planet got tired of his bad assistant and bought a cloning machine on Amazon to create an assistant him, right? That's because he was sick of incompetent people asking for ridiculous things like getting paid on time. Honestly, man, they just don't make workaholics like they used to. So he decides to clone himself, thinking that having two Peteys working on the same problem will be a great idea. But when he sees that his clone is still a baby, what does he do? What any reasonable person would do in that situation. Puts him in a box and abandons him in the middle of the street, of course. But Petey is actually the heart of the story, and eventually, he changes his mind and goes to Dog Man's house to take the kitten back. And here's where the difference lies. In the movie, Petey gets mad when he sees that the kitten became friends with Dog Man, and he takes him back just to stop that friendship from happening. He does it out of pure spite. You can see that he barely thinks it over before throwing away the comic book the kitten made for him as if it were trash. But in the comics, Petey is extremely disturbed and full of remorse over his decision. Man, just look at his face. You can see how much it's eating him up inside. And this is just one of the differences between the Dog Man movie and comics. So grab your round robots, subscribe to the channel, and let's analyze more interesting and clever changes made in the Dog Man movie, here on Zigzag. Still talking about the clone, there are two things I need to mention that really surprised me in the movie. In the original version, Pete simply talks to the kitten after he is born, appears, is created. I'm not sure how to describe it, but you get what I mean. However, in the adaptation, the so-called most evil cat in the world goes all out and tapes his clone to a chair. Pete can be way too over the top sometimes, seriously. But let's be real, the Dog Man universe is already exaggerated by nature, and this change just made everything even funnier. I mean, look at this cute little kitten. What kind of threat does he pose to the point of being tied up like that? It's so good. But what caught my attention the most was the cloning scene, which exists in both the books and the movie. However, in the animation, the machine's appearance underwent a major transformation, and the result was way better. In the original version, the device was just a simple little box, almost boring. But in the movie, it got a total revamp. Now it's much bigger, packed with technological details, and has a way more impressive design. And let's be honest, it makes way more sense for a cloning machine to have an imposing and futuristic look, right? After all, we're talking about a device capable of storing a clone for a long 18 years until it reaches adulthood. How could a tiny little machine handle a job like that? Not to mention that the movie version looks way cooler. Which version do you prefer? The one from the comics or the one from the movie? Tell us in the comments which one's your favorite using the hashtag cloning so we know. But I know why you're here. You want to know about the meatiest, juiciest changes they did from the comics to the movie, right? Alright, I've got one of these for you. Check this out. Did you know that the Dog Man movie condenses not one, not two, but 3 books? Yeah, dude. The whole story of Dog Man's origin, Petey creating the clone, and the cyborg fish Flippy being defeated, all of that happens across 3 books, with a bunch of stuff left out in between. They did it this way because, as I mentioned before, the heart of Dog Man's story is actually Petey, who goes on a journey from villain to hero throughout the 13 books. And his first big change happens precisely during the epic battle against Flippy. That's the moment when he does something good for the first time, because the big bad fish starts targeting little Petey, and then the world's most evil cat, but not really that evil, sacrifices himself instead. And this adaptation was so awesome because it was really well done in the movie format, right? Like, you can totally understand that Petey is the villain going through this journey, even with a bunch of stuff being cut. The little fish Flippy, in the original version, makes his first appearance in the second book as a gift that Dog Man gives to the chief. However, he develops psychic powers when too much super brain food spills into his tank, and as a result, he becomes a villain. After meeting a tragic end by being frozen, he ends up being revived as a cyborg in the third book. In the movie, though, this storyline plays out a little differently. The part where Flippy gains his powers and then dies is told entirely, but in a big summary that the chief gives to remind Dog Man of the story. This was a really smart change because normally when a character explains so much stuff, it doesn't turn out great, right? But since Dog Man's humor is different, this kind of scene worked perfectly. These guys really know how to adapt comics into movies. But back to Flippy. He actually only appears in his frozen version, which the chief gave to the Super Science Center to study. And even though the adaptation mainly focuses on the first 3 volumes of the saga, the writers decided to mix in elements from later books, creating a new dynamic for the narrative. The best example of this, definitely the appearance of Crude, Pete's father, which caught everyone by surprise. In the original material, he only shows up in For Whom the Ball Rolls, the 7th book in the franchise, when Pete has already abandoned his supervillain career and is living with little Petey. But in the movie, they end up meeting much earlier, before Cyborg Flippy is even defeated, which, in the books, only happens in the 3rd volume. And this is yet another change that benefits Petey's redemption arc, because to understand why he abandoned the clone in the street and later wanted to become a better cat, we need to know that he's evil nowadays because of his father. And this opens the door for a lot to happen in Dog Man 2, for example, without making the story boring to watch. There are 2 scenes from the comics that were completely cut from the movie, which made me a little sad not to see, but in the end, it made sense, and they're things that could be used in future movies. The first one actually has a reference in the film, which is this scene where the mayor gets super pissed at the chief because Petey keeps escaping from jail. She puts all the blame on Dog Man and orders the chief to take the pup off the case. In the movie, this is done to add drama, but in the comics, this also happens for a different reason. In the comics, the mayor is a super corrupt villain who, besides firing Dog Man, also fires the chief and replaces him with a robot that only obeys her. She does this so the robot won't respond to the crime she's committing and will send the police in the wrong direction. I would have loved to see this in the movie, but realistically, there was no way to fit all that in while still making sense with Petey's story. Now I'll tell you about the second scene, but before that, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. That helps the channel grow a lot. Thanks. And the second scene that was completely cut from the movie, and unlike the previous one, has 0 mention in the film, as if it never happened in the movie's lore, is this. As mentioned before, Petey was always escaping from the cat prison, right? One of these escapes happened in the dumbest way possible, and it only worked because it's the world of Dog Man. He cut out a piece of paper in his shape and drew himself on it to fake being crushed by a machine, and in the distraction, he used it to escape. But later, that paper came to life with the same life spray that makes Flippy and the buildings come to life in the movie, and this paper clone of Petey causes so much trouble that even Petey has to team up with Dog Man to defeat it. Wouldn't it have been awesome to see that in the movie?